Hello. All right, let's see. Do we have volume? We have a screen coming up. All right, Matthew, can you hear us? Are you there? Let us see.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hello.
Greetings and salutations.
Welcome, good sir. We're glad to have you with us here.
Likewise.
All right, let's see. Okay, here is,
Yeah.
we'll get you a quick tour. Here are the students. Everybody say hi.
Howdy.
Salutations once again. Good sir.
So there we go. We'll kind of just keep you right in this general area. I hope maybe stay. Okay. Perfect.
Can you see me?
It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for being our.
Amanda Bowen says hi.
What was that?
Amanda Bowen says hi.
Oh, wonderful. This is so good. Okay, everybody. Matthew, Ivan, Bennett. Oh, this is
Hello
this is
again.
wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and start off. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from, joining us today, and what you do.
Well, I'm Matt Bennett. I am joining you from the guest artist office at Pioneer Theater Company in Salt Lake City. Right outside that door is our green room for the actors. Pioneer Theater Company is a Lort B sized professional regional theater company in Utah. Lort B means we belong to the League of Regional Theaters, and B is a specific size. It means we've got over 900 seats, and it means that we engage actors with union contracts of a certain rate. So for Pioneer Theater Company, I am assistant business manager. I've worked here since 2005. I started part-time in the box office as a ticket agent. I worked as the concessions manager, and now I am assistant business manager, which is a woefully non-descriptive title for what I do. I do a lot of things, from pay the bills to create content for our social media feed. I host the podcast here, and I read scripts for our new play reading series, Play by Play. So that's my 9-to-5 life. And then aside from that, I'm also a playwright. I've been the resident playwright with Plan B Theater Company, which is a small professional theater company in downtown Salt Lake since 2007. And every year I write some piece for them. For this season, I'm doing a radio play in coordination with KUER, Radio West, and it is a sci-fi thriller called Circle. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. We're going to definitely jump into and want to talk about the playwright aspect and the work that you've done there. But first, tell us a bit about the podcast.
So the podcast began really just as a extra arm of publicity about 4 years ago, and we just started doing it in offices and then with a field recorder, and now we're in residence up at the audio studio at the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. I've been lucky enough over the years to interview some theater luminaries. I got to interview Frank Wildhorn, who is the composer of Jekyll and Hyde. He wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, which Pioneer Theater did the professional premiere of. I got to interview John Patrick Shanley, who wrote the play Outside Mullingar, and did a couple of big movies like Joe versus the Volcano. You guys probably don't know that because it's from the 80s. But yeah, I mean, the aim of the podcast has become educational. Like for this next one, we're doing The Play That Goes Wrong coming up here, which is a farce in the vein of Noises Off. And I'm going to interview a couple of actors and just talk to them about what physical comedy and broad farce is like versus other kinds of acting.
Wonderful. And are all of those episodes available that we can go and listen to them?
They are. It's on Apple, and it's also on our website, pioneertheater.org.
Great. I wonder if that's something that we might be able to kind of incorporate. As you said, it was good for promotions and advertising. That might be something we could start doing to help promote our shows. Really
Yeah.
That'd be cool. All right, let's talk about your playwriting. How many different plays have you written? Where have they been produced? I know some of the theater companies there in Utah have done some of your shows. Tell us a little bit about that process. How do you go from page to stage?
Well, I've been writing since high school. I wrote my first 10-minute play in high school, and then I wrote at Southern Utah University, as you know, one acts, and my first full-length play was produced when I was there. And by the time I graduated college, I went into college wanting to be an actor, and I sort of left college wanting to be a writer. And I've been at it ever since. So for Plan B, I've written now 10 radio plays. This year will be the 10th, and they've all been lucky enough to air. And for Plan B's stage, I think 7 full-length plays now, and then a number of short plays that have been a part of 24-hour theater festivals or fundraisers. And then I've actually workshopped here at Pioneer Theater Company. Earlier in the year, I was at the Great Plains Theater Conference, which is one of the larger national conferences for workshopping plays. I've been there a couple of times. That's my latest play called Art in Class, which is, I think, going to premiere at Plan B next season. And beyond that, I've collaborated with a devised theater company here in Salt Lake called Sackerson. I've got a show running with them right now at the Urban Arts Gallery. It's an installation piece that's set in 10 rooms and 10 audience members. It's all one-on-one, and people see the pieces completely at random. You just get assigned to different rooms at random. There's an act 1 and there's an act 2, and some of the rooms have actors, and some of the rooms have audio, and some have video, and some have ephemera that you interact with, like letters that I wrote. And I wrote that with 2 other people. I've got a piece coming up later this season called Let Down Your Hair, which is a modern retelling of Rapunzel at Wasatch Theater Company at the Gateway. And then I've also worked with Salt Lake Acting Company, both as an actor, and they've workshopped some of my pieces, and Pygmalion. And I think that's it. Although I workshopped with Utah Shakespeare too, and I've acted at Utah Shakespeare. And then pieces of mine have been in small theaters in Chicago, Recently, I had a full production at Omaha Community Playhouse. I had a piece at the Source Festival in DC. So here and there.
So how
But
do you finish a play, you've written it, how do you get it into the hands of those that are going to get it onto the stage? How does that process work?
Well, luckily that process has gotten easier over the years. Around the time I graduated college, the way that you did it is you went to a FedEx Kinko's and you printed out your script for $15 and you put it in the mail, and with a cover letter, and you hoped that you got a response. And now it's a lot easier. Most theaters will take email submissions by PDF, and there's an online networking site called newplayexchange.org, which is a way for playwrights to connect to literary managers and to theaters. But one big way to get your work out there is to apply for national theater conferences. Like, there's one called the National Theater Conference, or nicknamed the O'Neill. There's the Great Plain Theater Conference, which is in Omaha. There are a couple of great ones in the West. One's called Seven Devils in northern Idaho. One's called Last Frontier in Alaska. Another's called Playpen in Philadelphia. And what makes those so valuable is that you get an opportunity as a writer to go for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and focus on nothing but your play. And you get a director assigned to you, professional actors assigned to you, sometimes a dramaturg, and you get feedback from professionals in the business and your peers. Those experiences have been invaluable. I would say I've taken great leaps forward in my craft from doing those kinds of things. And of course, you've got to get productions, and you've got to work on plays in rehearsal. And so a lot of the work is just sending plays out there. I've got a friend named Rachel Bublitz who recently had a goal of submitting a play every day for a year. And she did it. And it paid off. And she found those submissions through online networks on Facebook. You can go to the Playwright Center, which is a development center in Minneapolis. The Dramatists Guild out of New York, they're another resource. They publish a book full of submission deadlines. There are I think at last count, about 1,900 theaters in the United States. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there. The problem is you've got to do the footwork, unless you've got an agent, and then the agent does the footwork. But even if you've got an agent, you still have to do a lot of footwork.
That's awesome. I didn't realize just how much went into that. I've read a couple of your scripts, and I've wondered how they go from being, on your computer or on your notes that you're sketching ideas, and then getting them actually to being produced on a stage. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I can outline for you what my go-to process is in developing a script, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have some students in here that are writers that are very interested in how that works. So please, share some insight.
Well, so the first part of the process is lonely, right? It is just you and your computer at the rough draft stage. And I would say if I'm dedicated, and once I've got a solid, strong idea for a play, it takes me anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months to complete a draft. And then what I do at that point usually is print it out and read it myself before I give it to anyone else. Sometimes other people see my rough drafts, but what I usually do is read through it, just make sure I didn't make any dumb, obvious typos, that the dialogue flows, that I didn't contradict myself in backstory. I do a quick rewrite, and then I usually give it to two people I trust. I try to give it to somebody who I know will just give me an honest gut reaction, and I try to give it to somebody who I know is smart about plays, who really knows how plays work, and knows dramaturgy inside out. And sometimes that's a dramaturg, and sometimes that's a director friend, sometimes it's another playwright. Then from there, I do another quick rewrite. And at the draft 3 stage, sometimes 2, 3, what I like to do is have people over for a living room reading. I like to hear it out loud with my actor friends. Then I get their feedback. I do another rewrite. That point, I will hand it off to a producer, typically. Somebody like my bosses at Pioneer, or Jerry Rapier, who's the producing director at Plan B, or some other local producer, and ask them what they think. And sometimes I'm just asking their opinion, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to get into a development process with them, where then we then go into a workshop. And a workshop might be 10 hours long, where you're in a room with actors over 3 days, and sometimes culminates in a private reading with invited guests, and sometimes culminates in a reading with audience members. Me, I like to be at about the 4th draft stage before I bring in an audience, but I love that phase of the process because I get loads of valuable feedback from people who like theater but don't necessarily know playwriting and aren't necessarily actors or directors or designers, just so that they can give me the simple feedback of, this part was slow to me, this grabbed me, don't cut that, whatever you do. And then I refine from there. And then I'm at the point where I'm sending them out to theater companies or festivals.
That's awesome. That's quite a process. That's so cool. Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned 24-hour theater?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's terrifying. So we've done at least 10 of those at Plan B, and we might do it again next year. We might bring it back. It's called Slam. It's a 24-hour theater festival. What would happen is I would show up at the theater at 8 o'clock at night. They would give me the title for a 10-minute play and the headshots of 3 actors, and they would say, these are your actors, these 3 women, or these 2 women, and this man, or these 3 men. It would all be at random. They would just shuffle them. And then they would send me home, and I would have to show up at 9 o'clock the next morning with a 10-minute play. And then at that point, they'd bring in the directors and the actors, and they would rehearse it from 9 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night when the call would begin. And then at 8 o'clock, 24 hours later, they would perform it with me in the audience with no sleep, because I hadn't slept the previous night and couldn't sleep during the day, just stressing out, thinking about what was going to become of my play. So sometimes it was just a title. Sometimes they gave me a title and an image. Like, this image will be projected in the background. One was called Mesa Verde, and it was the projected image of a Kiva ladder from the Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. Sometimes They showed me a table full of props and some costumes, and they would say, this is what you have to work with. And I would take a picture of it, or they would just give me a list of props, and I would have to work in those props or those costumes into my play, or try to, as non-artificially as possible. So I did that at least 10 times, once as an actor, and it's thrilling. It's scary and it's thrilling, and they could be dramas, they could be comedies. Sometimes they were issue driven. A couple of years they were supposed to be inspired by First Amendment issues, where they gave us they assigned us First Amendment issues from around the country and in Utah from the past year, and we were supposed to write a play inspired by that, by censorship issues. So let's see. Yeah.
Class, you guys think you'd like to attempt?
Yeah.
You guys should try it. It's a lot of fun. I don't know if I recommend staying up all night, but the audience likes that the playwright was tortured, I think. So.
Just the one show, or do they do several writers and do several shows?
Well, we always do it with 5 writers, and so it would be a 50 to 60 minute program every night. So I would be one of 5 writers, and with a 10-minute play, and they would be presented at random. So you might be first, you might be last, you might be fourth, etc. And sometimes it was on a theme, like I said, and sometimes we had all the same title. I did it a couple times where all 5 writers had the same title, and then so it was 5 plays with the same title and our different takes on that title.
I love the idea. I think that could be a fun thing we need to do. And do you use that as a fundraising event? Is it?
We did use it as a fundraising event once or twice. Yeah. Sometimes we would do it. Plan B Theater, like I said, is a small professional theater company. It operates out of the studio space at the Rose Wagner Performing Arts Center, which has about 65 seats. And sometimes we'll perform in the Black Box, which has about 250 seats. And then sometimes we'll be in the Genet Theater, which is about 500 seats. So we would do those special events like that in that 500 space theater. We do the radio hour in that 500 seat theater. And yeah, a couple of times it was a fundraiser, and it was punctuated a couple times with commentary from local politicians, or we had a band that played during the intervals, stuff like that.
That is awesome. I love it. Great idea.
Yeah, and more than once, those plays became the seeds of future plays. The first one I ever did, I got the title Must Have Been Cold, and I ended up writing a full-length play called Cold. The second time I got Mesa Verde, and I ended up writing a full-length play called Mesa Verde that was produced at Plan B in 2011. And one year, I forget the original title. I forget the 10-minute title, but it became the inspiration for a full-length play I wrote called The Cause, which was about Harriet Tubman.
Wow, that's fantastic. Cool. We're going to go ahead and open up for some student questions here at the moment. We'll start with Amber, because I think she's just ready for a question.
Sweet. Okay. Hi. I'm a junior. So I know you mentioned taking like Rapunzel in modern day and Pygmalion and all that. So how often do you find yourself taking these old stories or these old concepts and making a story, play out of that?
Well, I have done that on a regular basis. I have lots of original plays, but doing the radio hour, I've also had the opportunity to adapt. And so doing the radio hour, I've honed the skill of adapting other material. The first one I did was based on Utah ghost stories. And then the second one, I was asked to adapt Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel. And oftentimes I just get grabbed by that source material. And that's what happened with Rapunzel. In 2014, the radio hour was the Brothers Grimm stories. And so I adapted 3 Brothers Grimm stories. I did Rapunzel, one called The Juniper Tree, and Little Snow White. And I just got pulled into the original version of Rapunzel. Because actually, I started with the 1857 edition of Brothers Grimm, and then I decided to go back to the 1812, which was vastly different. And a lot of those stories are based on even older tales. And some people think that the Rapunzel tale goes back, 5 centuries or more. So I looked at some of those older versions of it, and I decided that I wanted to do a full-length modern update of it. It's called Let Down Your Hair, and it's told through the lens of sex education in America.
I think I'm more intrigued about this story before. Braxton.
What is your favorite play that you've ever written?
That's my favorite play that I've ever written. Well, I guess it's always the one I'm working on. But I'm actually, I guess, in like with my play Art in Class right now. Art in Class is an original play, but sourced from real life events. A lot of the stuff I do with Plan B Theater Company is socio-political in nature because that's their mission. Their mission is to produce unique and socio-political theater. And so on Christmas Day, I was driving back from my father-in-law's house home and checking the news on Twitter. And I saw that an elementary school art teacher from Cache Valley had been fired for showing classic works of art with nudity to his 5th and 6th grade students. And I ended up following the story in the news and then writing a play about it. And I has just been lucky to work on that a lot. I got to work on that in Milwaukee with a company called The Constructivists. I got to workshop it with Plan B. I got to workshop it here at Pioneer Theater Company in the play-by-play series, and then it went to Great Plains Theater Conference. And so I've spent a lot of time with that in the last year and a half, and have gotten the opportunity to dig deep into the characters, to work closely with the actresses. It's got a Latina main character, and so I relied a lot on the Latina actresses to help me make that as accurate as possible in my portrayal. And so I guess I'm proud of what I've done, and I guess I like it in a way because I'm in like with it right now, because although it's an issue-driven piece, I feel like I've managed to wed the issue-driven with the character-driven and to make it engaging just in its characters.
This brings up another question. In today's world of fear of cultural appropriation, when you're writing an issue piece, how do you be true to yourself as the writer while also making sure that you are respecting those cultural differences that may vary from you being a white male in Utah?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And that's something that the theater community is discussing a lot lately. I'm lucky to be in a network of writers through Plan B. Plan B Theater has a lab that meets once a week with several writers, and many of them are writers of color. And so we discuss those issues on a fairly regular basis. And a few months ago, instead of workshopping a play, we got together just to talk through those very issues about appropriation, about how you write a person of color respectfully as a white person, what sort of questions you should ask, what sort of questions you should not ask, and of course the writers of color had questions of the white writers too, and so it's something a lot of us are doing soul searching over. Me, I mean, part of how I check myself is actually reading my own work. Like I said, after I do the rough draft, I think as a rule of thumb, you should do that. You should put it in a drawer for a week and then come back to it once you've got some emotional distance, and then read what you've written and try to read it not as you, but as a stranger who's picked up this script and has never seen it before. And it can be difficult to adopt that point of view, but not as difficult as it sounds. And so just giving yourself some space and coming back to it helps. And simply looking as you read for stereotypes of any kind, because stereotypes are bad in writing in general, whether you're writing a character of color or a white person. There are stereotypes that are specific to drama teachers. There are stereotypes that are specific to high school students, and you want to avoid those and to make your characters as messy and real as possible, right? And then, of course, getting feedback. I think improving as a writer is really about getting feedback and being willing to take feedback. And of course, you have to establish a sense of confidence and knowing and a trust in yourself as a writer. But the feedback part never stops, no matter how many plays you write.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. All right, Ashley.
What's one thing you do before you go see one of your plays being produced?
What's one thing I do before I go see one of my plays produced? I try to get myself into a space of calm. Before I go, I like to sit at the back of the theater, never at the front of the theater. And of course, before I see my plays produced, I want to be in the rehearsal process and in the designer runs with other people, so I can hear first how other people are reacting to it. So I have an opportunity to make any changes that need to be changed. There are some things you can know from the page and from hearing it out loud, and then there are some things you can only know from seeing it staged in real time in 3 dimensions. And so
Good answer. Cassie, you had your hand up.
Hi. So when you're writing a script and you've got your draft, How much of the stage directions do you personally include, if any?
That's a great question. So, and a point of contention in the playwriting world in general. So, there are people who are of the opinion that plays should be like radio. You should get everything that you need to know from the dialogue, or that it should be like Shakespeare, which has very little stage direction. And then there are people of the opinion that you can include as much as you want. If you read the plays of George Bernard Shaw, for instance, those plays have pages of stage directions and insight into characters and backstory. And that is becoming popular again. I just read a play called John Proctor is the Villain by Kimberly Bellflower. And it is about a high school class reading The Crucible and the class's reaction to it. And they collectively decide that John Proctor is the villain. And that play has got loads of stage directions, and some of it maybe is unnecessary, but some of it gives wonderful insight into how the actor ought to play that moment, how the director ought to direct that moment, and just how the play ought to feel energetically on stage. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I feel like if it helps you visualize your play, and if you think it helps other people see the play, put it in. If it's something that just isn't playable, then maybe don't put it in. Or something that isn't directable, or something that's not designable.
We did The Crucible last year, so we have several students in the class that were in that production. We might have to take a look at that script. That sounds fun.
I've done that twice as an actor now.
All right, Cameron.
How much of your job now, specifically the business overseer part, do you think you got based on just networking and working hard and showing up and knowing the right people?
Well, like I said, I started part-time in the box office. I think I got that part-time box office job at Pioneer Theater because I had 3 other box office jobs. I worked part-time in a box office in Chicago. I lived there for 3 years. The Royal George Theater. I worked at the Chicago Shakespeare box office, and I worked at the box office for Utah Shakespeare Festival when I was a student, and I was also an assistant there in their marketing and business office. So I think that experience added up got me that part-time box office job. I had another full-time job at the time I got this. I was actually a cameraman for Channel 4 at the time, and it was killing my soul. And I wanted a day job in theater so badly, so I took that part-time job in the box office again. And then through happenstance, I would just say it was luck. The concessions manager quit, and I applied for that job. So I would say it was a combination of experience in box office jobs over 5 or 6 years and luck that eventually led me to this position. And certainly my work in the theater outside. I mean, Pioneer knew that I was a playwright and an actor outside of the job, and they value, theater companies in general value creative people, even in administration, even in the jobs that don't require creativity per se.
Good point. Right, Jordan.
What is like the craziest thing that has happened either like during the like production or one of the plays you wrote or like during the writing process and you're like, how did I even get to this point?
Oh gosh. So what's leaping to mind is a play I wrote for Plan B Theater Company in 2013 and 14 called Erica. And it's a play about a transgender man who falls in love for the first time. And at the time, I had no idea how I ended up writing that play, but it came about through just a weird series of coincidences and the evolution of the piece itself. It all began with me being asked to interview people in the community. The producing director of Plan B, Jerry Rapier, he's biracial, half Japanese, half Caucasian. And he had this idea for a play that was about biracial experience and wondered if I would interview people in the community. And so I did, and I started working up some monologues about that. And then as we talked, that it evolved into, well, what if it was also about women in business, like women in a man's world? And so I interviewed people about that. And then the idea grew to, well, what if we included trans experience in that? So the play grew, and it was pretty unwieldy at that point. We had a reading for it, and people said, I don't really know what this is. But what people liked were the monologues about the trans man. And probably they liked that because although I was always accepting of it and I knew people in the theater community who were trans, I never knew very much about it, but I became fascinated about it, and I watched documentaries and I read books and I sat down with at least 3 people in the community who were trans, and that just was the best material somehow coming from me. And then Harry asked me, well, why don't you write a 1-act about that, and it will be a part of a series of 1-acts. So I wrote the 1-act, and they liked it so much, they said, well, why don't you write a full-length play? So it ended up becoming a full-length play with the input of 2 people from the trans community giving me feedback on every single draft. And it was scary and weird for me to be doing it, but it connected. It really connected. We had the Pride Center here in Utah. We toured up to Ogden. It ended up going to the United Solo Festival in New York. We went to a gay and lesbian theater in Orange County, California, called Theater Out. And people connected to it and liked it. And that was sort of an out-of-body experience because it was something I never expected to be writing.
That was that's a 1-person script, correct?
Yeah, it's a 1-person script, about 70 minutes.
Wow, that's awesome. Did you have your hand up, Tristan, for a question, or just stretch? Amber, another one?
Yeah. So do you ever find yourself working on like 5 or 6 different projects at a time? And if so, how do you balance all of that?
I do find myself working on multiple projects at a time. In the last few years, I've also started screenwriting. A friend dragged me into that. And so I have at times been doing that opposite my playwriting, and my wife challenged me to do some fiction, and so I've tried some short stories here in the last 7-8 years, and written a novella, and of course have been working on multiple theater projects too at the same time. At Plan B, a couple of times I've had a radio play and a full-length play going up in the same year, and also maybe working on a short piece for some fundraiser that we're doing. So switching modes like that is not always easy. I think how you do it is you really have to take the time to clear your mind first. And I'm into mindfulness meditation. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's something I do to clear myself out from my day and my other projects first, and then connect to the emotions and the themes of the characters of the piece I'm writing. And so what I try to do is just ask myself, well, like, what do I want the audience to feel when they're watching this? And I try to build that feeling up into myself, and then I start writing.
Awesome. That's about our time. Matthew, thank you so much for all that insight. That was valuable, especially to our writers and our other students. Thank you. You're amazing. We sure appreciate you.
Yeah.
Goodbye. All right.
I'll send you guys some links, okay?
Yep, please tell everybody hi for us.
All right.
And thanks again for sharing your day with us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care. I did.